Hello there, it's 6 o'clock. I'm Michelle Dewberry, and this is Dewbs & Co.
Right that injustice, and within the 5 years of the Labour government, we will compensate them for the money that they've lost.
That's Angela Rayner there, not that long ago, basically, as you heard, saying that the injustice of WASPy women would be compensated within 5 years. Well, I can tell you now, it is a day of shame, if you ask me. Almost 4 million WASPy women will be now denied that much promised and much needed, in some cases, compensation. What do you think to that? What have the pensioners actually done to upset the Labour Party? Get in touch and tell me. Also, Tory leader Kemi Badenoch, she has called a flat rate of tax attractive. Is it or not? And Reform UK have called Labour's plans to potentially scrap some local council by-elections a threat to democracy, apparently designed to stop their party's success. Do you agree with that or not? And get a load of this. The EU is suing the UK over post-Brexit freedom of movement failures, apparently. What on earth is going on? All of that and lots more keeping me company tonight. Ben Habib, the former co-deputy leader of Reform UK, and Paul Richards, the former Labour special advisor. But before we get stuck in, let's cross live for your 6 o'clock news headlines.
Good evening, I'm Sophia Wensler with your headlines from the GB Newsroom. Your top story this hour. Sarah Sharif's father and stepmother have been sentenced to life in prison for the brutal murder of their 10-year-old daughter following years of horrific abuse. Irfan Sharif was handed a minimum of 40 years in prison, while Bainash Batul received 33 years. Her uncle, Faisal Malik, was jailed for 16 years for failing to prevent her death. In a harrowing statement, Justice Kavanaugh said Sarah's suffering was almost impossible to contemplate, revealing that in the final weeks of her life, she was tied up, hooded and had plastic bags put over her head. He revealed that Sarah was found with 71 separate fresh injuries, including fractures and burns. In a victim impact statement, Sarah's mother said she is now an angel looking down from heaven. In other news, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is heading to Cairo for Gaza ceasefire talks. That's according to Reuters news agency. Uncertainty is surrounding Netanyahu's whereabouts, but it's understood a deal is expected to be signed in the coming days. Meanwhile, Hamas has said that a ceasefire deal is possible, but only if Israel didn't set new conditions. Now, it's being reported that the new Prime Minister of Mauritius says the Chagos Islands deal struck by Sir Keir Starmer isn't good enough and he wants to reopen talks. It's understood he rejects current terms as they would not produce the benefits that the nation could expect. His government has made counter-proposals to London and received a response, though no details have yet been provided. Another 7 asylum hotels will close in the new year. That's according to the Home Secretary. Yvette Cooper told the Commons Home Affairs Committee today that she had issued closure orders for the 7 hotels as the backlog of asylum cases has now started coming down. In November, ministers admitted 14 hotels had been opened and 7 closed since Labour came to power, bringing the total use to 220. And the government has rejected calls for compensation for women affected by changes to the state pension age. The Work and Pension Secretary says paying a flat rate for all women born in the 1950s would cost taxpayers more than £10 billion and wouldn't be fair. Women Against State Pension Inequality, also known as WASPy, say they weren't properly informed about the changes. While Liz Kendall admitted there was a delay in notifying women, she insisted most were aware of the pension age rise. She has now confirmed there will be no compensation scheme, despite calls for one. Those are the latest GB News headlines. Now it's back to Michelle.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you very much for that. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company until 7 o'clock tonight. Alongside me, I've got my panel, Ben Habib, the former co-deputy leader of Reform UK, and Paul Richards, the former Labour Special Advisor. Good evening to you, gents. You're very welcome tonight. As are each and every single one of you at home, what's on your mind tonight? I bet I can imagine when it comes to lots of you, but you can get in touch all the usual ways. You can email me, gbviews@gbnews.com. You can go to the website, gbnews.com/yoursay, or you can tweet or X me. I've got to just say, before we get into the agenda tonight, there's so much we need to discuss. I just want to reference that Sarah Sharif case, because we've followed this case with horror, quite frankly, and I do just hope that little girl rests in peace, and I hope those individuals that have today been sentenced, I wish that life meant life, that people never saw the light of day ever again, quite frankly. It's an awful, awful situation, and may that little girl rest in peace. And the big story, of course, on the news agenda today will be one that affects many of my viewers at home. I speak, of course, of WASPy. Are you a WASPy woman? Do you know what a WASPy woman is? Are you sitting there thinking, I've never even heard of this in all my life, in which case, where have you been? But worry not, because I shall explain all. WASPy relates to almost 4 million women who, you know, they're grafters, they went out to work, they paid their dues, and they expected to have a state pension. They knew what they were doing, and then the goalposts were changed very, very quickly, and in some cases, many would argue, without the proper and due process when it came to warning people and to give time for those people to accurately plan their retirements. Can you imagine that you're working, you think that you've got X amount of years to go and all the rest of it, you plan your life, you plan your finances, and then boom, the goalposts are shifted. You'd be very distressed, I imagine, by that situation. But many people have picked up the plight of the so-called WASPy women, promising time and time and time again to pick up this injustice and to fix it. It's been a big question mark as to what will happen next, hanging over these women. Well, today we've got the answer. The Work and Pensions Secretary said the following in Commons today. Let's take a listen.
Given the vast majority of women knew the state pension age was increasing, the government does not believe paying a flat rate to all women at a cost of up to £10.5 billion would be a fair or proportionate use of taxpayers' money, not least when the previous government failed to set aside a single penny for any compensation scheme, and when they left us a £22 billion black hole in the public finances.
I can hear many of you at home. I've just heard one of my panel breathe a sigh of frustration with that. Now, let me tell you now, right? I could have literally filled my entire programme for so long with clips of prominent people within the Labour Party promising that they would actually do something about this. Liz Kendall, you've just heard from her there. Let me show you a picture of Liz Kendall. Not that long ago, I'll describe it. If you're listening on the radio, she stood there in front of a WASPy woman board, basically showing her support and her desire to define and find a fair solution for these women. You've got Angela Rayner. I showed you a clip in part of her. Let's listen to her clip in full, what she said back in 2019.
Well, the government failed the women who were born in the 1950s. They stole their pension, that contract, that agreement that they thought they had, and then accelerated it so that those women didn't have the chance to prepare for that. We've said we'll right that injustice, and within the 5 years of the Labour government, we will compensate them for the money that they've lost. This is their money.
Honestly, right, I could genuinely go on. You've got Keir Starmer, him back in 2022. He's saying this is a real injustice. Why, you know, you need to have this big campaign. He accepts that goalposts were moved and so on and so forth. And I mean, if you're a pensioner or a lady that's been affected by this, I understand why you would have voted for the Labour Party. You would have thought, hopefully, you'll finally get those wrongs righted. In fact, actually, I'll swing myself round and I'll come to you, Paul. Does the Labour Party have some kind of problem with pensioners in this country?
I think Liz Kendall's decision today shows that the difference between being in government and being in opposition. And in opposition, you can wave placards around and you can make some of the statements that you're highlighting. But when you get into government and you open the books and you see the true extent of the mess and you're confronted with the hard choices that governments have to make. And the choice today was, do we give £10 billion away to this group of pensioners, or do we do something different? Liz Kendall, I think, has made the right choice. It's going to cause fury. We know it will, and it is a really tough choice, but this is the situation Labour's inherited.
So I'll ask you again, do you have a problem with pensioners? Because this is now the second time that pensioners have been chosen as priority number one to smack.
Well,
so you've had the winter fuel, you've now got this one, so I put it to you again. Do the Labour Party have a problem with pensioners that have paid their dues their whole life, that have gone without, that have really struggled? We talk about the struggles of today. I mean, come on.
The other half of the announcement today, of course, was a reiteration of this triple lock on pensions, which means all pensions are going to go up, at least £1,000 for some pensioners. And so, actually, of course, Labour is on the side of pensioners. And the triple lock being maintained, public money being spent on those pensions, means that most pensions are going to be better off. And that's a good sign. So, it needs to be looked in the round. And also, as Liz Kendall said today, we're going to get waiting lists down in the NHS. We're going to have more police on the streets so pensioners can feel safer. You have to look at these policies in the round and all the things we are doing for pensioners.
All right, well, I'll look at it in the round then, because another announcement that was made today is apparently we're also skint and we can't afford to right the wrongs of injustice. We can't afford to keep our pensioners warm. But another announcement, seeing as you want me to take it in the round, is that another £35 million is now going to be made available for support for people in Ukraine. And this comprises £15 million for humanitarian support as temperatures drop in the winter. Keir Starmer goes on. He says Ukrainian families are enduring cold, dark nights, often without heating or light or electricity, he says. I'm telling you now, pensioners will be watching this programme in Britain today. They will be sitting there in cold, dark houses because of decisions
They're not being bombed by
made.
the Russians, though, are they? And this is about supporting our ally Ukraine in a war, existential war against Putin's forces.
Where's the priority?
So you're comparing 10 million to support Ukrainians to 10 billion.
I'm not comparing 10 million. No, I'm comparing 35.
The waspy women want.
I'm comparing £35 million, and I've just described 15 of it.
Well, I think we need to do more for Ukraine. I think we need to put more money into that war because they've got to win it.
But I thought we were skint. To the point where we're literally telling our pensioners, I promise you, I speak to people all the time on this programme, they will be sitting, many people at home, Paul, they will be sitting under blankets, they'll be wrapping themselves in goodness knows how many layers of stuff. They daren't put their heating on. And whilst it's very tragic what's happening in another country, and my heart goes out to anyone who's suffering, charity, if you want to use that word, should begin at home.
It's in our strategic interest to support the Ukrainians, and we need them to win that war, because if we don't win it there, we're having to fight in Estonia or Moldova. Putin's forces will just keep on coming.
Well,
it's a war that we've got to win.
No, you've got no evidence.
There's quite a lot of evidence for everything he's done over the last 20 years. He keeps invading countries, and if he gets away with it, he carries on.
So the priority in your mind is fighting Russia, not protecting our own pensioners?
You can do both, because the triple lock will protect pensioners, Michelle, and that's
there will be no... This is a sidetrack in a sense, but there will be no outright victory against Russia. It just isn't conceivable.
Well, but they can be expelled from Ukrainian territory.
They will not be expelled from Ukraine. That war has become an intractable war out of which both sides will find it extremely difficult to get out. And the 10 million that was promised to Ukraine today is frankly a drop in the...
It's not 10 million, it's 35 million.
35 million is a drop in the ocean compared to the near £7.5 billion that we've given to Ukraine to fight the war. Or the £11 billion, and I'm going to now make my point, £11 billion that we've given to foreign climate change projects. Or the £50 million that we declared yesterday, a couple of days ago, for Hayat Tahrir Shams, an al-Qaeda prescribed organisation. We, the British government, are going to be giving a terrorist organisation 50 million quid, apparently for humanitarian purposes. It's all about spending choices. And what really gets my goat is when you hear Labour wrongly and falsely trotting out this £22 billion black hole. Any budget deficit is a black hole. And notwithstanding this false claim that they keep making about £22 billion being in a black hole, in the last budget, there was £70 billion of new spending obligations. £70 billion, half of which was funded by tax rises, and 2/3 of those tax rises fell on the working class.
But the WASPI compensation wasn't funded, was it? There was no 10 billion in the budget for that, which is why Liz Kendall can't afford it today.
The point I'm making, Paul, is that it is all about choices. government spending is all about choices, and they have chosen not to pay the WASPy women. And I think we've got to recognise that. It's about choices. But the bigger point here, I think, is a failing United Kingdom. A United Kingdom where the social contract is habitually being set aside in the pursuit of saving money because we as a country are getting progressively
poorer. Don't forget the extra money for the NHS, though, in the last budget. I mean, there is choices to be made, and we decided to prop up the NHS, and that's a good choice for everyone, including pensioners.
The NHS has had oodles and oodles of cash, much more than there was on the red bus in 2016, spent on it over the last few years. There's no shortage of cash going into the NHS.
I want to carry on this conversation after the break. I'll be bringing in some WASPy women. I'll be bringing in lots of you at home. My inbox is literally on fire on this debate. I also want to explore that topic that Ben has just primed, the social contract in Britain. We've discussed this before. Do you actually think that has now broken, ripped up, shredded to smithereens? Or do you think it still exists and you're still respectful of it and you think, brilliant? Get in touch and tell me your thoughts, and I'll see you in 2. Hi there, Michelle Dewberry with you till 7 o'clock tonight. Alongside me, my panel, I've got Ben Habib and Paul Richards alongside me. Hell hath no fury like a waspy woman scorned. Goodness gracious me. Honestly, I'm not exaggerating. The anger that is coming through from viewers at home is really quite palpable. The disappointment. I think people are just in despair, really, really despairing at the moment about politicians promising one thing and then delivering something completely different. One of my viewers, Catherine, as well, she says, please can you point out to everybody, they keep talking about things like the triple lock. She's saying there's 2 different types. You've got your new basic pension and your other one. She's saying for the ones that are on the basic previous one, they get left out of a lot of stuff. That's according to Catherine. Who's this? Robbie says, normally, Michelle, I agree with you, but I don't agree with you and the WASPy women on this. You're saying WASPy women only care about those born up to 1959. What about everybody else? He goes on to tell me that he's had some challenges with his pension and he thinks now 64 would have been a fair pension age for both men and women. So many of you just feel so let down. If you are a WASPy woman, Helen, you're saying that you are and that you just feel completely betrayed. Catherine, Michelle, why are we constantly being able to give money overseas, abroad for all different issues? Why can't we help people here? I think that is the $1 million question that really is coming through thick and fast. The notion of the social contract, I've got to tell you now, loads of you saying, no, Matt, says Michelle, there isn't a social contract between the government and ordinary people. Personally, I feel finished with this country and the place that I used to call my home feels so very long gone. And he says, it is all so sad. That's Matt. Ben Habib, bring you back in on this one.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it is all about the social contract. And what we've seen, and I would start probably in 2010, when in the pursuit of rescuing the banks, the Bank of England printed money. And what that did was rescue those who had actually got the country into real trouble and devalue the pound in the back pockets of the working and middle classes, who had no hand in creating the credit crunch of the 2009 period, 2008-2009 credit crunch. And that was the biggest breaking of the social contract from a financial perspective that I've seen in my lifetime. Those who caused the crash were bailed out, and those who had no hand in it were punished by weakening the value of sterling in their back pocket. And then instead of doing something to mitigate the damage that had been done to that social contract, George Osborne, who was then Chancellor, went on an austerity drive, punishing the working and middle classes even more. And I'm absolutely convinced one of the causes for people voting to leave the EU was what happened in 2009 and the bailing out of the banks and the punishing of the working and middle classes, because it fundamentally broke the value of money and therefore the social contract between the state and the people. But we have habitual abuses of the social contract. So, for example, we do not police our borders. It is an absolute cornerstone, in my view, of a social contract with the British people that our borders should be enforced. We have, for example, 1.5 million foreigners on benefits in this country, which I estimate costs the Exchequer around £15 billion a year. Then we have illegal migrants who are costing the thick end of £8 billion a year. That's your £22 billion a year just there. And then instead of looking after the interests of Britons, of British citizens, we get constant feed on what we're doing abroad, all these great projects on which we're spending money, which have no tangible and immediate benefit for the British people. And I saw Starmer today defending his inability to commit to increasing our military spend to 3% of GDP. Our armed forces are a shadow of their former selves. We are busy stoking the bear in Russia, firing British-made Storm Shadow missiles into Russia, but we're not arming up in the UK, again, because we can't afford to do it. And that is another breach of the social contract.
Ben, I thought you believed in a small state and lower taxes, and now you're saying spend more on the army, give more to the pensioners. I mean, you sound like a socialist.
No, hold on. What I wouldn't have done is raise taxes on the working and middle classes like Angela Rayner did in the last budget, absolutely clobbering, again, the working and middle classes. Hiring has gone through the floor in the last... The increase in national insurance on employers and national insurance. We've seen a complete freeze in the employment market over the last year and a half, hitting precisely the people which, again, the Labour government promised that it wouldn't hit. I'll just finish. So we have had a non-stop series of massive breaches of the social contract with the British people. It's not just the Labour government. It's successive governments ever since 2009, as far as I can see.
I think people still do believe in the social contract. I think most people in this country support the police. I think they believe in paying their taxes on time. I think they love the National Health Service. I think there is a connection
people
still
who voted
to those
Brexit.
Institutions of our country. People have not lost faith in those British institutions. I think there still is a contract as a result.
People who voted to leave the EU look at Parliament and see it as a body that stood in the way of democracy. That's what we see.
Well, who are these people? I mean, you might, but I think you can't
people who voted to leave the EU. That is it is not about losing faith in the Labour Party or losing faith in the Conservative Party. It is losing faith in the institutions of this country that govern us. If you look at the turnout of this last election, it's a great example. Turnout of 59.5%. Labour Party got fewer votes in 2024 than it did in 2019, and yet it got a thumping majority. And that's because the people are on strike. They don't believe in the institutions. Absolutely.
Well, don't worry, everybody. We're going to carry on this conversation about the EU towards the back of the programme, but I do want to just explore what you just said. You were saying, Paul, that people still believe in the institutions of the police and whatever, and therefore the social contract is still in place. And I don't doubt that. I think that people do, yes, it's great to have the police and whatever. The challenge is, and this is what I would ask you, do you honestly believe, because the contract is, it's a two-way street, isn't it? You put in, and in your hour of need or moment of need, you get out. Do you actually really genuinely believe that the institutions that you've just mentioned, when people have spent their lives putting into the system, that those institutions are there for those individuals during their moment of need?
Well, take the National Health Service, which I mentioned. I think that has enormous public support. It's almost our national religion, isn't it? Our support. You did. You asked about institutions, what you put in and what you get out. You put in, you pay your tax and you get the NHS.
No, I don't doubt that they have support.
Explain what you meant then.
I don't doubt that they have support. I think everyone still supports the concept and notion of the police and the NHS. I'm asking you, in your moment of need, whether or not, I don't know, you feel like you're about to collapse in the streets or your house gets burgled or whatever, as much as we might love and whatever these institutions, do you believe and do you have faith that they are there if you need them in your moment of need?
I see what you mean. Well, one of our critiques is, of course, there were fewer cops than we needed, so we're going to put more police on the streets. One of our critiques was you had to wait too long for NHS treatment, so we're going to shorten the waiting list. So these institutions, to survive in the same way, do have to be modernised, and there has to be more money put in.
I don't see the NHS as an institution. It's a public service. And it's the result of what our institutions do. Institutions are Parliament, the Supreme Court, the Bank of England. These are the military.
You'd like it to be social insurance and not have a national health service available to all, do you?
These are the institutions which are being hollowed out. Right, I think we're going to talk about democracy in the next segment. Hollowed out by anti-democratic moves made repeatedly, largely, I'm afraid, on this occasion by Labour governments, not Conservative governments, dumbing down our democracy and habitually breaking the social contract.
Disagree.
It happens all the time. I mean, two-tier policing is another great example.
Well,
progressive discrimination, the regulatory framework of diversity, equity and inclusion, all a breaching of the social contract with the British people. All of it.
Look, imagine this is your social contracts that you've got at home, everyone. Do you sit and longingly and lovingly caress and stroke this and think, yes, Michelle, the social contract, it's there? Or are you quite frankly like this? You say, you know what, that social contract is not now worth the paper it was written on. How do you feel about that? Get in touch and let me know your thoughts. So much we need to discuss. We've just been touching on tax. Do you think that we should have a flat rate of tax in this country? Would that be a fair, better way of doing things? And I want to talk about local councils potentially being delayed. Reform UK reckon that this is because Labour Party are running scared of their progress. Is it really? Your thoughts. See you in 2. Hello there, good evening. Michelle Dewberry, Dewbs & Co. with you till 7. If you're just joining, you are very welcome tonight. Ben Habib, the former co-deputy leader of Reform UK, and Paul Richards, the former Labour special advisor, alongside me. Honestly, so much response coming in. Shame, shame, shame. That is what one waspy woman has got in touch today saying, Michelle, it feels like they can give money to absolutely everybody except the pensioners. This lady feels that the Labour Party have lied to get elected aid. Says, Michelle, it's wrong that women weren't giving full notice, proper notice of the changes, and they accept that. But ultimately, what this person's saying is that feminists really should want everything to be equal and retire at the same time, and so on and so forth. What do you think to that one? This one's made me quite sad. Jan, in Runcorn, you said, I'm a waspy woman, and honestly, Michelle, I feel like crying at the decision today. I feel so let down by the lies of the government. I'm currently sat with my husband. We're sitting under a blanket on our sofa to try and stay warm. She says, shame on this government. Pamela says, Michelle, I'm a waspy woman and I knew well in advance of the increase. So where on earth have all these women been? She goes on to say it's men, quite frankly, who need compensating for having to work till 65, meaning that they would have paid more into the system, but with a much lower life expectancy. She reckons that they would have received less than men. Well, I can tell you that conversation will continue. I promised earlier on that we'd hear from one of the representatives of one of the WASPI organisations, and here she is. This is the chair of one of them, Angela Medden. Let's listen.
Bitterly disappointed. I think we can all say we expected more from a Labour government after their years of support in opposition. And it's just amazing that they can cherry pick their own watchdogs' recommendations and say, I agree with this bit, but I don't agree with that bit. And come up with new evidence, seemingly outside of the evidence that was given to the Ombudsman by the Department of Work and Pensions, who were supposed to fully comply.
Well, there you go. You're very welcome to keep that conversation coming tonight. I do read all of your emails and I'll try and include some more before the end of the programme. Now, before the break, I was asking you whether or not the social contract of this country is still there, is still a thing, is still relevant and respected by each of you. I even ripped up as a demonstration, and Ben Habib very kindly tidied it all up for me. So thanks for that, Ben. I appreciate that. But talking about social contracts, one of the key aspects of that is the tax that we pay and how well or not it is actually spent. Now, the Tory leader, Kemi Badenoch, she has been discussing matters and came up with an interesting idea, or at least one worthy of discussion. She's saying the idea of a flat rate tax would be to her attractive. If you don't know what that means, basically, well, the clue is in the title, really. It's a flat rate. It's the same level. It means that those potentially at the lower end would pay more, and those potentially at the higher end would pay less. What do you think to that at home? Ben Habib, your thoughts?
So I'm a great believer in reducing taxes and simplifying the tax code, because you're going to get more tax, frankly, as an exchequer. You're going to collect more tax if that's what you do. And the flat rate tax, when it first was established, I haven't heard it applied in that way to personal taxation, but when it was first conceived, was a flat rate of tax for businesses, so that you wouldn't get tax arbitrage, as they call it, between setting up a company or being a sole trader or being a consultant. You know, you would just go into business, and whether you had a limited partnership, limited company, etc., you'd pay the same tax, and it would be simple, and you wouldn't have all sorts of offsets that would be used to reduce your income before you paid tax. It would be a very, very simple tax code. And they have a similar thing in Poland. They have a similar thing in Romania. I do business in both countries, actually, and it works really well. And even individuals can set themselves up effectively like a business and benefit from that flat rate of tax. But it's complex when it gets to personal taxation because, of course, we do have a very well-established system of, you know, paying according to your means, and if you're richer, you pay more. And actually, I'm in favour of that. I think that is something that should stay. I think it's
absolutely.
Come on, Paul, in it comes.
Balmy. I've never heard anything quite so balmy in all my days. It's the equivalent.
You need to get out more.
It's the equivalent of the poll tax, and you may remember what happened to the poll tax. The idea there was we all pay the same for, regardless of how much we earn, whether a dustman or a duke, and it brought down Mrs Thatcher. There was rioting in the streets, and Kemi wants to do the same thing again now.
I think it's a brilliant idea. It's a brilliant idea.
GB News viewers will be paying more tax under a flat tax because they're people who are hardworking and paying their taxes, and under that system, the rich pay less and the poor may pay more.
Paul,
that's absolutely nuts.
At the moment, it's the poor who are being whacked by your government. Kemi's idea, Kemi's approach, which he said was in principle attractive, is one of simplifying the tax code and reducing the tax rate.
Nonsense.
What people, I'm afraid, on your side of the fence never understand is that when you overtax the economic organism,
it needs to be fair tax.
What happens is the economic
the
economic organism ceases to function, which is where we're at in the United Kingdom right now. Your growth disappears. You end up in recession. That's where we're heading.
But a flat tax wouldn't help with any of that.
If we reduce taxes now, and we cut spending at the same time. Cut, for example, the £35 billion a year we're paying to banks on their deposits.
Suggested that and tried it as well, and that went horribly wrong. These experiments don't work.
It's not an experiment. It is an absolute necessity that we must ditch the ridiculous cost burden of net zero, ditch the ridiculous payments we make to banks on the cash that we use to bail them out. Absolutely. The cost of net zero for this country, by the Treasury's own estimates, is £50 billion a year. And we know the Treasury never overestimates costs.
Back to Kemi, though. I mean, if she's floating this kind of poll tax idea...
It's not a poll tax idea.
She's just lost the plot completely.
She's lost the plot in your mind because what she's seeking to do is pare back the tax rate. We're now paying the highest taxes since World War II.
She's suggesting poorer people pay more tax, which I think is an unusual view for
your government just nailed the working class in the last budget. Absolutely singled them out and taxed them. And we are seeing a collapse in employment in the economy. We're heading into recession. We're heading into recession with imported inflation.
I don't think we're going to
It's going to be a very dangerous economy in the next 6 months. Let me tell you, we are flirting. The country right now is flirting with a sovereign debt crisis. That is precisely what the UK is doing. Clobbering the economy, raising taxes, increasing borrowing. And it's going to hit sterling. We're going to import inflation. Interest rates will have to stay high. And we will not be able to get out of the downward loop that the Labour government has created within 3 months of taking office. It's going to happen.
Well, let's come back in 3 months and see if there's a recession, because I don't believe there will be, because I think consumer spending will go up over the Christmas period, as it always does. I think the services sector will pick up and hospitality will pick up because people are out partying.
Oh, let's hope you're right.
And those were the two drags on inflationary pressures, weren't they, in the last set of figures? So I don't think there's going to be a recession.
So hang on. So the Labour Party is going to avoid a recession because of things outside of its control. So if it wasn't the Christmas period... would you be so confident that we're going to... I know, but if it wasn't the Christmas period...
Well, I think if you look at for example, the increases in the minimum wage, where 3 million workers have had a pay increase, then they're going to be spending that money in the economy. They're going to be spending it with shops and restaurants and bars and pubs, and that puts money into the economy. And
but even better if you reduce taxes. You have more money in your back pocket, you spend it,
but
the velocity of money... That is precisely
poor people
what...
paying more, rich people paying less. That's what a flat tax is.
Well,
and that was a bad idea.
Kemi, Kemi absolutely
and
qualified.
She said it was attractive.
She qualified her.
She said it was attractive. She's attracted to it.
She qualified her statement. She was making the case for the principle.
Look, she's playing in the big leagues now. You can't just say this stuff out loud and then not be able to defend it. You know,
what, like Keir Starmer? Come on, Paul.
He hasn't said anything about a flat
Keir
tax.
Starmer flip-flops. I mean, on just about every single subject, every 5 seconds. The man hasn't got a moral...
Do you think Kemi Badenoch's doing a good job as leader of the Conservative Party?
She's only taken over last month. I would absolutely give Kemi time. I think Kemi is a genuine Conservative.
She's losing her Prime Minister's questions every single week.
I think she holds him to account extremely well.
The money is going towards reform. Reform are the ones winning all these council by-elections, which is, I'm sure, we're about to be talking about. And she's got no buzz at all, no momentum at all.
Well, we'll find out in time.
Has Keir Starmer got momentum?
Well, sort of downwards momentum, possibly. But, I mean, he is in government. Governments are always unpopular, aren't they?
Come on.
Not as unpopular as this one.
Come off it, Paul.
Well, they are. No one likes the government,
We've
do they?
all seen the graphs in terms of the popularity ratings and what's happened to Keir Starmer's. I mean, it's not a good look, is it?
Well, to use Ben's argument, it's early days. Let's see what happens.
When we talk about playing in the big leagues and sensible words should be spoken, all the rest of it, there'll be many people thinking of Louise Haigh as Transport Secretary, talking about people like P&O, calling them rogue operators and telling
she was
people
out, wasn't she? She's out of the job.
Yeah,
she's
but
gone.
You still can't be operating like that when you hold ministerial roles and when you do operate like that as a government. And I think other people shouldn't be pontificating about other people, saying that they need to perhaps behave like they're in the big league. Anyway, look, I will just be fair to Kemi Badenoch before I go to the break. She was asked about the flat rate tax at this farmers' summit the other day. I think it was yesterday or the day before. And what she said... this is an idea that I've heard many times. It's very attractive, but if we are going to get to that sort of scenario, there would be a lot of work we need to do firsthand. And Paul as well, saying that it probably would mean that the poor would pay more tax. I've got to say, on some of the countries we explained it operating in, the tax rate on those countries is 20%. Of course, people will be familiar with the fact that the lowest tax band in our country outside of personal allowance is also 20%. So, look, you can have your thought process on whether or not you think that's a good idea coming up after the break. Labour Party. This whole notion that we might delay some local council by-elections, Reform UK reckon that's because Labour are running scared of their popularity. Is that right or not? See you in 2.
Ready to soak up that holiday sunshine?
Won't we need some cover?
No worries. All sorted.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
Unsettled at times across western parts of Europe with some stronger winds and perhaps some outbreaks of rain, but elsewhere it should be largely settled. Fairly breezy around Madeira, though largely dry, just a bit cloudy. Perhaps some thicker cloud moving into parts of Portugal with a risk of some rain, and also fairly breezy around coasts. But elsewhere it is going to be largely settled, lots of dry weather around, though perhaps just a few showers around northern parts of Italy. And the remaining largely settled as we head into the weekend, just a slight dip in temperatures by Saturday.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
Hello there, I'm Michelle Dewberry. This is Dewbs & Co. and we're with you till 7 o'clock tonight alongside me. I've enjoyed the debate tonight, everybody. Have you? You've got Ben Habib and you've got Paul Richards. Everyone feels like they've had their Weetabix on set tonight, and I do like that indeed. But look, we spoke yesterday, didn't we, about the biggest local authority reforms apparently for 50 years. Well, one of those aspects, there were some questions asked about the upcoming by-elections and whether or not they would all take place. And it became quite clear that actually, potentially, no, they will not, because the argument from the Labour Party will be, well, essentially, if we're going to replace or merge or expand or whatever we're going to do, tinkering with these councils, it would be essentially wrong and a waste of time, money and effort to have these by-elections. Well, not everybody is happy with that explanation. Let's take a listen to one of the Reform UK MPs speaking out about this.
James McMurdoch.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Yesterday, a former Labour deputy leader referenced my party as a threat to democracy. Now, I'm sure that was a cute turn of phrase for television, but given the framework you've laid out for elections next year to be gained so easily, isn't the real threat here potentially the Labour Party?
Well, I think, was I calling them by-elections? I don't mean by-elections, I mean the actual council elections. Let me start with you on this, Paul. What do you think to this? Are you running scared Labour Party reform?
I've never seen social media lose its mind like it has over the fact that some elections may or may not take place, and normally turnout for these things is sort of 20% or whatever. Suddenly everyone's really excited about some county council elections.
You, Paul. There's a theme here. Are they doing this because they are worried?
Fair. No, we're not worried at all. And if you're going to have an election for a body that's about to be abolished, what a waste of money. So you have the elections for the bodies that are going to exist in the future, where we're going to have councillors representing us. So and that's all it is.
Do you think nothing to see here? The likes of Reform UK, who was suggesting.
Well, that's
that
a different. The question is reform on the way up? Yes, it is. Is it a genuine threat to the Tories and to Labour in certain areas? Yes, also. But this isn't a response to that. Our response to it is to get a political programme together that people want to vote for, and to look at the way that reform positions itself, and to think, well, how does it work? You know, but it's not. This is not a sort of mechanistic response by saying we're going to abolish democracy, which is what social media was suggesting. It's just a nonsense. And if people are that excited about the local elections, stand as candidates. Let's get the percentages up to 70% turnout, you know, if people care that much.
Ben Habib?
So I think if the councils exist at the time that elections are supposed to take place, then those elections should take place. If they've been abolished before the elections and they've been merged into some greater district council, well, then they no longer exist.
Can I just ask a genuine question?
Yeah.
If it's a body that's about to be abolished in 6 months' time, do you not think it's a waste of taxpayers' money to have somebody elected on expenses for 6 months
it is absolutely,
in a body that isn't going to exist?
It is absolutely a waste of taxpayers' money, but then get on and abolish them before the elections. It was a waste of taxpayers' money that the Brexit Party and a whole load of other parties had to stand in the European elections in 2019. They should have left the EU before May 2019. That's what they should have done. But if you're going to do something, they should have done. March 29th, 2019 was the last day.
Labour's argument is don't elect somebody to something that isn't going to exist and waste all that money and
You can't say it's not going to exist and therefore we won't have an election. You can say it no longer exists, so we won't have an election. But if it exists, then I think you must hold an election, because we can't be confident that they will absolutely abolish it, and they may just then kick the can down the road, and it may be quite a neat trick to do it. So reform is right to call them out. But there are many, many greater things I think reform should be calling the government out when it comes to the hollowing out of our democracy. The first of which was the first item on the King's Speech, which is where the Labour government wishes to give legislative force to the Office of Budget Responsibility, requiring chancellors to consult with the OBR before a chancellor can settle their budget.
What's wrong with that? That stops the Liz Truss scenario where you ignore the advice.
That is the antithesis of our elected officials doing what they're elected for. The OBR is a black box. It's unaccountable. We didn't elect it. We didn't appoint it. There are three levers that governments have. The three levers governments used to have. One was monetary policy. Blair gave that away completely to the Bank of England. One is fiscal policy, which the Labour Party wishes now to give away to the OBR. And then the third is the making of rules and regulations and laws. And that, too, has been significantly dumbed down by the Labour Party, successive governments, started by Tony Blair. And we're about to do it, and the Labour Party is about to do it again by aligning us more closely with Europe, handing more power over to Europe, making European courts superior and above British courts. This is all a hollowing out of our democracy, and this all undermines that social contract that we were also discussing in a prior segment.
If Liz Truss had listened to the OBR, she might still be Prime Minister.
Liz Truss was absolutely spot on with the notion that she had to cut taxes.
She tanked the economy and everyone's mortgages went up.
She did not tank the economy. That is an economically illiterate statement. It is an economically illiterate statement to say she tanked the economy. It is economically illiterate to say that. What she did was have an adverse market effect. And the reason she had an adverse market... But the markets are not the economy. Her budget was never put into place. Her budget was never given effect. Therefore, it had no economic impact. The markets reacted badly because our institutions no longer own stocks and shares. Our pension funds don't. They own government debt. And government debt went up in price. Their assets assets went down in value. If our economy had been more balanced as a result, if it had been better handled in the years beforehand, and our pension funds and insurance companies actually invested in the things they should be investing in.
Liz Truss, is that what your argument is?
I am saying Liz Truss is...
come back.
It's very convenient for those of you who like big state, high regulations, massive taxation, to nail Liz Truss. Sadly, the delivery of her budget was not good, and she didn't stand by it.
And it was a disaster for the economy, for the British people, and ultimately for her. Liz Truss's economic policy was the last chance we had as a country to put the ship right before you lot took over and really are now tanking it.
Well, there you go. I've got to say, Robert Jenrick, Paul mentioned social media about that council reorganisation. He got involved on Twitter saying elections should only be postponed in truly exceptional circumstances. When we reorganised councils in the last parliament, we rejected the idea, prizing democratic accountability. The only flaw with that was it then got community noted, which basically means fact checks for those people not on Twitter, saying that they did indeed cancel elections in 3 English counties due to planned reorganisation. So that tweet was hastily deleted, I can tell you that. I didn't get a chance to show you the picture of Elon Musk and Nigel Farage. Did you see that? Goodness me, that's one for another day.
Scary stuff.
That's all we've got time for, gents. Thanks to you at home. Have a good night. I'll see you tomorrow night.
We'll see a cold snap, which will quickly develop into a warm front. Boxed Boiler Repairs, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening. Here's your latest GB News weather update from the Met Office. Whilst it's pretty mild at the moment, we are going to see temperatures dropping as we go through the next 24 to 48 hours or so. And before that, we have some strong winds and some heavy rain due to an area of low pressure that's currently tracking just to the north of the UK, and it is deepening as it does so. As a result, we've already seen the winds strengthening. The strongest winds overnight will be around western coastal parts. Here, gusts could reach 50 to 60 miles per hour, and there will be quite a bit of wet weather around, the heaviest, most persistent rain towards the north and west. With all the unsettled weather around, temperatures not dropping a huge amount, most places staying in high single figures, if not double digits. So it will be a mild start to the day for many of us tomorrow, but quite a blustery or windy one. Across southern parts of England, there will be some outbreaks of drizzly rain and also some low cloud, bringing some hill fog. Across northern parts of England, some heavy persistent rain could cause some problems on the roads. Meanwhile, across Northern Ireland and Scotland, the more persistent rain will have pushed through, but there'll be plenty of showers following in behind. Whilst it will be a mild start to the day here, we're going to have some colder air coming in from the northwest. As a result, temperatures are actually going to drop in the north as we go through the day, and so there's a good chance that some of those showers will turn wintry, especially over higher ground. Otherwise, and we are going to see some bright weather for a time, some sunshine developing in many places, and in the south holding on to that milder air, so temperatures well above average for the time of year, but later on some wet weather feeding in from the southwest. That will then push through eastwards as we go overnight into Thursday, clearing away during Thursday morning. And then, yes, there are some showers around on Thursday, but a good deal of dry and at times bright weather, but we have a northerly or northwesterly wind, so temperatures dropping. Thursday is going to be markedly colder than the start of this week. Temperatures should pick up again as we head towards the weekend, with a bit of rain at times.
A nice bright morning will generate a lovely warm day, right through to the evening. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.